The cool breeze of an early autumn evening swept through the quiet suburban home. Inside, the Patterson family was settling in for the night. The soft hum of the baby monitor in the corner of the living room provided a comforting background noise. It had become part of their nightly routine since bringing home their newborn Emma a few months ago. Thomas, a young father juggling the new challenges of parenthood, sat on the couch, flipping through a book. His wife, Clara, busied herself in the kitchen preparing bottles for the following day. Their dog, Max, lay curled at Thomas's feet, a loyal companion who had been with the family for years. Max had always been gentle and protective, traits Thomas cherished as Emma arrived. He rarely left the baby's side during the day, often curling up near her crib while she napped. But over the past few nights, Max's behavior had shifted. He began growling softly each time he neared the nursery, his ears twitching as if sensing something unseen. At first, Thomas dismissed it as a fluke. Max was an intelligent dog, and his protective instincts often led to unusual behavior. But as the nights wore on, the growls grew more frequent and intense. Last night, Max had refused to leave the nursery, his low rumble waking Thomas from a light sleep. It wasn't like Max to be so restless. "Thomas, is everything okay?" Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway holding Emma, who had just been fed and burped. The baby's tiny fingers clutched at Clara's shirt, her eyes fluttering closed. "Yeah," Thomas replied, though the worry in his voice was evident. "It's just Max. He's been acting strange." Clara glanced at the dog, her brow furrowing. "Strange how?" "He keeps growling at night, especially near the nursery," Thomas explained. "I thought it might be a mouse or something, but I checked everywhere. There's nothing." Clara's gaze softened as she watched Max. "Maybe he's just adjusting to having Emma around. He's protective, you know that." Thomas nodded, but a lingering unease settled in his chest. Max had been through countless changes with the family, moves, holidays, and even noisy renovations without so much as a bark of protest. This was different. Later that evening, as Clara went to bed and Emma settled into her crib, Thomas decided to investigate further. He sat in the nursery, the faint glow of a nightlight illuminating the room. Max lay at his feet, his posture tense. The dog's ears twitched and a low growl escaped his throat. "What is it, boy?" Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. He scanned the room, his eyes darting to the corners and shadows. Nothing seemed out of place. The mobile above Emma's crib spun lazily, its soft lullaby playing a comforting tune. Max's growl deepened, and he rose to his feet, his body rigid as he faced the far corner of the room. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He stood slowly, his heart pounding as he followed Max's gaze. There was nothing there, just the faint outline of the rocking chair, bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. A sudden creak broke the silence, the sound sending Thomas's heart racing. He turned toward the source, only to realize it was the rocking chair swaying gently, as if moved by an invisible hand. His rational mind searched for an explanation, a draft, perhaps, but the windows were closed and the air was still. Max barked sharply, the sound startling in the quiet nursery. Emma stirred in her crib, but didn't wake. Thomas reached down to calm Max, his hand brushing the dog's fur. "It's okay, buddy," he said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "There's nothing here." But Max didn't seem convinced. His eyes remained fixed on the corner, his growl a low, constant vibration that echoed through the room. Thomas felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Something was unsettling Max, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. "I'll figure this out," Thomas murmured, his resolve strengthening. He glanced at Emma, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Whatever was causing Max's behavior, Thomas knew one thing for certain: he needed to protect his family. The following night, Thomas decided to set up a baby monitor with video capability, aiming it at Emma's crib and the corner of the room that seemed to draw Max's unease. He wanted to know what his loyal dog was sensing that he could not. Clara raised an eyebrow when he explained his plan, but didn't argue. "If it puts your mind at ease, go for it," she said with a tired smile. As the household settled into sleep, Thomas sat in the living room, the baby monitor's screen glowing softly in front of him. Max lay by his side, alert as always. The nursery appeared calm on the screen, Emma's tiny figure snug under her blanket. For a while, there was nothing unusual, just the gentle rhythm of the baby's breathing and the occasional flicker of the nightlight. But then, just past midnight, Max sat up abruptly, his ears perking toward the nursery. A low growl rumbled in his throat, and he stared intently at the monitor. Thomas followed the dog's gaze and leaned closer to the screen. The rocking chair in the corner began to move. It was subtle at first, just a slight sway, but it quickly gained momentum. Thomas's heart raced. He stared at the screen, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. No one was in the room. The windows were shut, and the air vents weren't strong enough to move the chair like that. Yet it rocked, steady and deliberate. Max barked, startling Thomas. The baby monitor emitted a soft crackle, and for a moment the screen distorted. When it cleared, Thomas froze. A faint shadow flickered near the chair, vague and formless but undeniably there. The shadow lingered for a moment before fading away, leaving the room still once more. Thomas didn't hesitate. He bolted up the stairs, Max at his heels. Pushing open the nursery door, he found the room exactly as it appeared on the monitor. Emma slept soundly in her crib, the rocking chair now motionless, but the air felt heavy, charged with something Thomas couldn't explain. "Clara!" he called, his voice shaking. She appeared moments later, her face etched with concern. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, not wanting to alarm her unnecessarily. "It's probably nothing," he said, forcing a weak smile. "I just thought I heard something." Clara glanced at Max, who stood by the crib, his eyes fixed on the rocking chair. "Max doesn't think it's nothing," she said softly. Thomas decided not to mention the shadow he had seen, at least not yet. Instead, he spent the rest of the night in the nursery, his hand resting protectively on the crib. Max refused to leave, his presence a comforting reminder that they weren't entirely alone. The next day, Thomas couldn't shake the unease from the night before. He scoured the nursery for anything that might explain the strange occurrences. He checked the chair, the crib, the walls, even the ceiling. Nothing seemed out of place. Finally, his search led him to the attic. The entrance was a small panel in the hallway ceiling, directly above the nursery. Thomas hesitated before pulling the ladder down. Max sat at the bottom of the steps, his ears flat against his head. The attic was dim and musty, filled with forgotten boxes and old furniture. Thomas shone a flashlight around the space, his breath visible in the cool air. At first, it seemed unremarkable, just a typical attic. But as he moved closer to the area above the nursery, he noticed something strange. An old wooden chest sat tucked against the far wall, its lid slightly ajar. Dust coated the surface, and the faint scent of mildew hung in the air. Thomas approached cautiously, his heart pounding. He lifted the lid, revealing a collection of faded photographs, yellowed papers, and a small, tarnished locket. The photographs depicted a family, a mother, father, and a young boy, standing in front of a house that looked eerily similar to his own. The papers appeared to be handwritten letters, their ink smudged but legible. One line caught his eye. "We couldn't save him, but we hope he finds peace here." Thomas's breath hitched. He opened the locket, revealing a tiny portrait of the same boy from the photographs. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the connection. The shadow he had seen in the nursery. It wasn't random. It was tied to this boy and this family. Max let out a soft whine from the hallway, breaking Thomas's thoughts. He carefully packed the items back into the chest, his mind racing with questions. What had happened in this house before they moved in, and why was it connected to his daughter? Returning to the nursery, Thomas found Max back at his post beside the crib, his eyes watchful. "You knew something was here all along," Thomas murmured, kneeling beside the dog. "But why now?" As night fell, Thomas prepared himself for another long vigil. Whatever was haunting their home, he was determined to uncover the truth and to protect his family at all costs. The attic discovery weighed heavily on Thomas as he sat in the living room, the photographs and letters spread out on the coffee table before him. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Max lay nearby, his eyes fixed on the baby monitor, as if ready to spring into action at the first sign of trouble. Clara walked in, her brow furrowing when she saw the items. "Thomas, what is all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. He hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I found these in the attic," he said finally, gesturing to the photos and letters. "They belong to a family that lived here before us." Clara picked up one of the photographs, her expression softening as she studied the smiling faces. "They look so happy," she murmured. "What happened to them?" "I don't know," Thomas admitted, "but something isn't right. These letters." He picked up one of the faded sheets, pointing to a line. "We couldn't save him, but we hope he finds peace here." "What do you think they meant by that?" Clara's gaze shifted to the baby monitor. The screen displayed Emma's peaceful sleeping form, the nursery bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. "You think it's connected to what's been happening in her room?" Thomas nodded, his jaw tightening. "I don't think Max is growling at nothing. He knows something's there." Clara sat down beside him, her hands trembling slightly. "What do we do, Thomas? I don't want anything happening to Emma." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on hers. "We'll figure this out. Together." That night, Thomas decided to keep watch in the nursery again. He brought the photographs and letters with him, hoping they might help him make sense of what was happening. Max settled into his usual spot near the crib, his posture tense and alert. As the hours ticked by, Thomas sifted through the papers, piecing together fragments of the family's story. The boy in the photographs was named Benjamin. From the letters, Thomas learned that Benjamin had passed away tragically in the house many years ago. The exact details were unclear, but the sorrow in the words was palpable. "He loved this room," one letter read. "It was his safe space. We pray he finds comfort here, even in the afterlife." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. The nursery had once belonged to Benjamin, and now it was Emma's room. Could his presence be lingering, drawn to the place that had been his sanctuary? Just after midnight, Max growled softly, his body stiffening. Thomas's heart raced as he turned to the baby monitor. The rocking chair in the corner was moving again, its motion slow but deliberate. The shadow returned, faint but unmistakable. This time, however, it lingered near the crib. Thomas stood, his breath catching in his throat. Max barked once, a sharp sound that echoed through the nursery. The shadow paused, as if acknowledging the dog's presence. Then, slowly, it retreated toward the corner, fading into the dim light. Emma stirred in her crib, but didn't wake. Thomas approached cautiously, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" The air in the room felt heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. Max let out a low whine, his gaze locked on the crib. Thomas's hand hovered over the photographs on the dresser, his fingers brushing against the locket he had found in the attic. He opened the locket again, staring at the tiny portrait of Benjamin. The boy's face, frozen in time, looked so peaceful. "Is it you?" Thomas asked. his voice barely audible. "Are you protecting her?" As if in response, the nightlight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Max relaxed slightly, his growl fading into a soft whimper. Thomas knelt beside the crib, his hand resting gently on the frame. "If you're here to help," he said, "then thank you. But if you mean harm—" His words trailed off, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The room remained still, the only sound the faint hum of the monitor. Thomas glanced at Max, who seemed calmer now, his posture no longer tense. The rest of the night passed without incident, but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he had been on the verge of something profound. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but the full picture remained just out of reach. One thing was certain, though, whatever was in the nursery, it wasn't random. It was tied to Benjamin, to the family who had lived there before, and it wasn't going to leave until its story was understood. The following morning, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the photographs and letters spread before him once more. Clara joined him, holding a steaming cup of coffee, her face still etched with concern from the night before. Max lay nearby, his ears twitching occasionally, as though he was still on alert. "Thomas," Clara said softly, breaking the silence, "do you really think Benjamin is still here, watching over Emma?" Thomas sighed, his hands running through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but the more I read these letters, the more I think he might be. Maybe he's not trying to hurt her. Maybe he's trying to protect her." Clara frowned, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph showing young Benjamin holding a stuffed bear. Protect her from what? Thomas didn't have an answer. The thought of his baby being in danger sent a wave of unease through him, but the idea of a benevolent presence watching over her brought a strange kind of comfort. "I think I need to try something," he said finally. "I need to speak to him." Clara stared at him, her eyes widening. "Speak to him? How? Thomas, this is—" "I know how it sounds," he interrupted gently, "but this can't just be a coincidence. Everything points back to him, his room, his belongings, Max's behavior. I need to understand why he's here." That evening, after Clara and Emma had gone to bed, Thomas returned to the nursery. He carried the photographs, letters, and the locket with him, arranging them carefully on a small table by the crib. The rocking chair stood still in the corner, and the soft glow of the nightlight bathed the room in a warm hue. Max settled near the crib as usual, his gaze fixed on the corner where the shadow had appeared. Thomas knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his fur. "It's okay, boy," he murmured. "We're going to figure this out." Taking a deep breath, Thomas addressed the empty room. "Shh, Benjamin," he began, his voice steady but soft. "If you're here, I need you to help me understand. I need to know why you're watching over Emma." For a moment, nothing happened. The room remained silent, the air still. Then the nightlight flickered, casting brief shadows across the walls. Max stood, his ears perking up, but he didn't growl. Instead, he let out a low, almost plaintive whine. Thomas's heart raced as he continued. "I know this was your room," he said. "I found your letters. I found your locket. I know you loved this place, and I think you loved your family, but Emma is my family, and I need to know if you're here to help or harm." The rocking chair moved slightly, the faint creak of its motion breaking the silence. Thomas stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. The shadow appeared again, faint but unmistakable, lingering near the chair. Max barked once, but it wasn't a warning. It was almost as if he were acknowledging the presence. The shadow moved toward the crib, hovering for a moment before retreating to the corner. Thomas's hands trembled as he reached for the locket. "This belonged to you," he said, holding it up. "Your family loved you, and they wanted you to find peace. If you're here to protect Emma, we're grateful. But if you're still hurting, I need to help you move on." The nightlight flickered again, and the rocking chair stilled. The shadow seemed to dissolve into the faint glow of the room, leaving a quiet calm in its wake. Max lay down beside the crib, his body relaxed for the first time in days. Thomas felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He placed the locket on the dresser, a small gesture of respect for the boy whose spirit had lingered in their home. The next morning, Thomas shared everything with Clara. Together, they decided to honor Benjamin's memory by keeping the locket and letters safe, a reminder of the family that had lived in their home before them. Thomas contacted a local historian to learn more about the house's past, hoping to piece together the rest of the story. In the days that followed, Max's behavior returned to normal. He no longer growled at night, and the nursery felt lighter, as though an unseen burden had been lifted. Thomas still watched the baby monitor closely, but the rocking chair remained still, and the shadow did not return. As he rocked Emma to sleep one evening, Thomas glanced at the locket on the dresser and smiled. "You've found peace," he said softly, "and so have we." The days turned into weeks, and life in the Patterson household returned to a comforting normalcy. Emma thrived, her giggles filling the nursery as she began to discover the world around her. Max, ever her loyal protector, seemed more at ease, his days spent lounging near her crib or following her tiny footsteps as she learned to crawl. The locket and letters found a new home in a small keepsake box on a shelf in the living room. Clara had carefully preserved the photographs, framing one of young Benjamin and his family. It hung in the hallway, a quiet tribute to the boy whose presence had lingered in their home. Thomas often found himself reflecting on the experience. He couldn't explain everything that had happened, but he no longer felt fear. Instead, there was a sense of gratitude for Benjamin's protection, for Max's unwavering loyalty, and for the bond that had grown stronger within his family. One afternoon, Thomas decided to visit the local historical society to learn more about Benjamin's family. The archivist, an elderly man with a kind smile, helped Thomas comb through old records and newspapers. They discovered that Benjamin had been the only child of a family who had lived in the house decades ago. He had passed away tragically from an illness, but the community had rallied around the family, offering support and prayers. "It's remarkable," the archivist said, looking at the photograph Thomas had brought with him. "Families leave their mark on a home in ways we don't always understand. It seems Benjamin's spirit was looking after yours." Thomas nodded, the words resonating deeply. He left the Historical Society with a renewed appreciation for the connections that tied people to places and to each other across time. That evening, as Thomas put Emma to bed, he noticed Max sitting quietly by the window. The dog's posture was relaxed, his gaze fixed on the stars above. It was as if he too had found peace in the wake of the events that had unsettled their home. Thomas knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "You've been her guardian angel, haven't you?" he murmured. Max let out a soft woof, his tail wagging gently. As the months passed, the rocking chair remained still, the shadow a distant memory. The nursery, once filled with unease, became a sanctuary of warmth and love. Thomas and Clara often found themselves sitting there together, watching Emma sleep and marveling at how their lives had been touched by forces they couldn't fully comprehend. On Emma's first birthday, Clara suggested a small celebration in the nursery, inviting close family and friends. As the room filled with laughter and the scent of freshly baked cake, Thomas couldn't help but glance at the locket on the dresser. He felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the boy whose story had intertwined with their own. That night, after the guests had left and Emma had drifted off to sleep, Thomas returned to the nursery one last time. The room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. He sat in the rocking chair, his thoughts drifting to Benjamin. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "for watching over her, for helping us." The nightlight flickered briefly, casting a gentle glow across the room. Thomas smiled, his heart full. He knew the bond they had shared with Benjamin, though fleeting, had left an indelible mark on their lives. As he left the nursery, Max followed him to the living room, settling at his feet. Together they watched the stars through the window, their shared silence a testament to the journey they had taken and the peace they had finally found. If this heartfelt story of love, loyalty, and the unseen connections that protect us moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's celebrate the moments that bring light to our lives.